Welcome, everyone, to today's Explainer. Today we are unpacking an absolutely dramatic generational saga pulled straight from the historical records of Second Chronicles, covering chapters 21 through 25. We're focusing on the kings of Judah to explore a phenomenon that is honestly just as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. We're talking about the fragility of legacy. It's a fascinating, intense study of how quickly a rock-solid foundation can just crumble to dust. So let's jump right in. Okay, let's dive into this. Listen to this actual epitaph. He passed away, to no one's regret, and his people made no fire in his honor. Just let that sink in for a second. Imagine being a king, possessing absolute ultimate power, and dying with literally no one shedding a single tear for you. No honor, no legacy, no love. This is the tragic, bitter end of King Jehoram. But how does a guy who had such a massive head start in life end up so utterly unloved and completely unremembered? Section 1, Legacy Lost, King Jehoram. Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds. We're going to map out these generations of Judah, starting one generation back with the faithful King Jehoshaphat. He left behind this incredible spiritual inheritance and a totally prosperous, victorious nation. But as we move to our present subject, Jehoram, we're going to see that inheritance violently squandered almost overnight. And from there, we'll trace the cascading effects. One generation later to Ahaziah, 2 generations down to Joash, and 3 to Amaziah. Keeping this historical roadmap in mind is going to help anchor us, because it really shows how one single generation's choices cascade down to the next. So what exactly was Jehoram's tragic path? Well, the very second he took power, he made this ruthless, cold calculation. He actually murdered his own brothers just to secure his throne. Then he married the daughter of Ahab, deliberately choosing to adopt a corrupt, idolatrous culture over his father's faith. You see, when a leader loses their spiritual compass, they end up destroying their closest relationships. And to completely seal his fate, he ignored a final direct warning letter from the prophet Elijah. That ultimate rejection completely fractured the entire nation's political and military stability, which inevitably led to revolt and ruin. Which brings us to an unavoidable question. Whose path are you following? Jehoram had his father's righteous path right in front of him, plain as day, but he deliberately chose the path of his wife's corrupt family instead. It really forces us to pause and reflect on the fact that faith and integrity are active daily choices. They are absolutely never just a guaranteed inheritance you can coast on. Section 2, the surviving seed. Unfortunately, Jehoram's toxic choices don't just stop with him. They actually infect his son Ahaziah, leading to a brutal royal purge. It plays out like a dark political thriller. First, Ahaziah takes power, listens to terrible counsel from his mother, Athaliah, aligns with all the wrong people, and then dies under divine judgment after just 1 year on the throne. Second, Queen Athaliah steps in and ruthlessly executes the remaining royal heirs to cement her own power. She is literally trying to wipe out God's entire covenant line. But look closely at step 3. Baby Joash is secretly hidden away in the temple. Against all odds, God miraculously preserves a single baby against this brutal regime. For 6 whole years, the boy is hidden away. And when the priest Jehoiada finally acts to restore the young king, it isn't just another bloody military coup. It is a true covenant renewal. Jehoiada gathers the leaders and explicitly prioritizes God's order and word over mere political power. They literally hand the young boy king the book of the law right along with his crown. It was this courageous, intentional return to the word that dismantled Athaliah's reign and finally restored true peace to the city. So even when everything seems completely lost, do you see the hope God preserves? Athaliah thought she had destroyed the entire royal line. She thought she'd won. But God never lets his covenant fire completely burn out. Even in the absolute darkest historical moments, when evil seems to have totally won, God is already preparing the next step in secret. Section 3, Dependent Faith, King Joash. Joash's story is such a profound warning about a faith that looks amazing on the outside, but completely lacks deep roots. Now, what's really interesting about this contrast is how it starkly splits his reign into 2 completely different halves. On one side, while the priest Jehoiada lived, Joash was incredibly faithful. He even led a massive, beautiful campaign to repair the ruined temple. But on the other side, after Jehoiada died, everything flipped. Joash listened to corrupt princes, turned immediately back to idols, and completely silenced the prophets. It is the perfect, tragic illustration of the fatal flaw of a borrowed faith, a faith anchored entirely to a person rather than to God. And the whole tragedy culminates in this truly shocking betrayal. King Joash actually ordered the stoning of Zechariah. And who was Zechariah? He was the son of Jehoiada, the son of the very priest who saved Josh's life as a baby and practically raised him. It's heartbreaking. When a dependent faith loses its human anchor, it doesn't just quietly fade away. It rapidly collapses into violence, attacking the very truth and the very people who once protected it. Which brings us to a critical crossroads. Is your faith attached to God, or is it attached to a person? Think about it. If your integrity, your devotion, or your core values are only being held up by the presence of a mentor, a parent, or some charismatic leader, what exactly happens when they're gone? It's a tough question, but we must all examine the true foundations of our own spiritual lives. Section 4. Half-hearted. King Amaziah. Amaziah is such a fascinating case study. He managed to avoid the total, immediate apostasy of his predecessors, but he fell into a subtle and honestly equally dangerous trap: calculating incomplete devotion. The ancient record states it perfectly. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, but not wholeheartedly. See, Amaziah followed the rules. He even spared the children of his father's assassins based strictly on the law of Moses. But his obedience was built entirely on technicalities. He was checking the boxes, but his obedience was never fueled by a fully surrendered heart. And this brilliantly illustrates his whole mindset, the number 100. Amaziah actually paid 100 talents of silver to hire mercenaries from Israel because he just didn't quite trust God to win the battle for him. And when a prophet told him to send those mercenaries back, his first question wasn't about God's will. Nope. It was, but what about my 100 talents of silver? He was obsessed with the financial loss. It perfectly shows how financial calculation and a desire for self-preservation will always obstruct true trust in God. Now, Amaziah does eventually send those mercenaries back, but his heart definitely isn't in it. And the aftermath is just completely baffling. Amaziah wins the war purely with God's help, but then he brings home the defeated enemy's gods to worship. It is sheer absurdity. He essentially uses God as a tool for a military victory, only to turn right around and worship the useless idols of the exact same people he just defeated, simply because he refuses to listen to correction. So the sharp question we really have to ask ourselves here is, are you following God, or are you just using him? Is your obedience a joyous, wholehearted devotion? Or is it just a calculated transaction? A convenient way to get what you want, secure a quick victory, and then immediately return to your own desires. Section 5. The ultimate question. We've watched 4 generations of kings now: Jehoram, Ahaziah, Joash, and Amaziah, and we've witnessed all of their cascading failures. So the crucial point is understanding the sheer fragility of legacy. Let's break it down. First, faith is a deeply personal choice, not an inheritance. You just cannot ride on the coattails of the previous generation. Second, toxic relationships can destroy not just a person, but an entire nation. And third, half-hearted, calculated obedience will eventually fail you. A faith that relies on someone else or only obeys when it's financially profitable will inevitably collapse. If legacy is truly this fragile, if a lifetime of faithful, hard-fought building can be squandered in a single generation, what kind of foundation are you building today? Is your foundation rooted deeply enough and genuinely enough to actually outlast you? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope mapping out this incredible historical saga sparks some deep, meaningful reflection on the choices you're making right now.